Greetings, I'm Valerie Moore O'Keefe, Mamaroneck Town Supervisor, and we're thrilled to have with us two important people here today. I'd like to introduce Mamaroneck Town Historian, Dr. Paula Lippsett. Hi Paula, how are you?
Hello.
Paula is the author of a book that was put out by the town on our, what Paula, when was it?
The 300th anniversary of our first town government meeting.
And when was that? What year was that?
Our first meeting was
Yeah.
in
Okay.
1697, so this was in 1997.
So in 1997, we had a tricentennial celebration, and this very well-written and cogent and readable book was put out as a not only a memento, but as an academic exercise, and Paula was the author. And we also have with us a very exciting guest from overseas, Mr. Edward Richbell, who's come over from England, and guess what? He is a descendant of the founder of the town of Mamaroneck, John Richbell. So, welcome here, Mr. Richbell.
Thank you.
Good. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you found out about your progenitor, your ancestor, John Richbell.
Well, in '61, I had an Uncle Tom who unveiled the memorial plaque on the Boston Post Road, and he brought the history of John Richbell back to England, and my father, who was his brother, he was given this, and we had it in our family for a few years. When my father died, I inherited it, and I decided that I would try and do something about finding out. Well, we went for a tour on the west side of the country, and we went to the Mormons.
Is there a genealogical center or something?
That's it, yes.
Yeah.
And we found there that they had some literature about John Richbell being a constable of Mamaroneck. And so I decided then that we would come. We thought we could come here, but it was 3,000 miles away. Anyway, we decided that we would come and make another journey. And we bought a map of America and found out where Mamaroneck was. And then we got some friends in Canada that knew of Mamaroneck, and they made a booking for us in the motel of Mamaroneck.
So what
And that's where
happened
we
was,
started.
this past Monday, Mr. Richbell and his friend came to the Mamaroneck Town Hall, and we didn't know he was here, and he had already spoken to Donald March, who's the president of the Historical Society in the village of Mamaroneck, and then we got him together with Paula, who knows a lot about John Richbell. Paula, tell us what you know about John Richbell.
John Richbell was a native of Hampshire, England, and he came over to this area, Massachusetts. He was a merchant in Massachusetts, and he was here at the time of the Navigation Acts, and they were very strict, and a lot of merchants tried to find ways to get around these laws.
Was this back in the 1600s?
Right. Yeah. And in 1661, he purchased land, 3 necks of land in this area. One was Orienta, the present-day Orienta. One is Larchmont Manor, and one was Davenport Neck in New Rochelle. And he purchased this land, we believe, perhaps to smuggle items into the area. With the harbors and the necks of land jutting out, it would be an ideal site.
So then he bought this land, and then from the Indians, who were the Siwanoy Indians,
right.
and there was Chief Manhattan and Chief somebody else.
Yeah, Wapaquiwan.
Okay, now what did he pay the Indians for the land? Do you know?
Well, we're not sure who got the better deal, but there were many items such as shirts and articles of clothing, hose and shovels, items, as well as wampum.
Okay, now, what is wampum? Wampum.
That was really the currency of the Indians. They took seashells and they ground them into beads. Different colored beads had different denominations, different value, and they were the source of exchange in those days.
Now, Mr. Richbell, you know that your ancestor, John Richbell, bought the land from the Indians, but shortly thereafter, apparently the Indians sold the same piece of land to somebody else.
Yes, and it was rather confusing at the time, and John Richbell had to take him to court, and John Richbell won the day.
They said that the Indians really had no concept, as we did, of private property, so they didn't really think that any one person could, as we'd say, have title to the dominion over it.
Right.
So there was a dispute, and I think that Peter Stuyvesant at that point was
He was
the Governor General of
exactly,
New
New
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, right.
So he decided in favor of John Richbell. Is that what
He
happened?
did, and he had gotten there first, so to speak,
Yeah.
and so he gave him the patent to the area.
And of course the chief also admitted that John Richbell was the first.
Okay.
So that was...
Now, we're very excited now. We could jump back in time to the time of John Richbell. Now, where did he come from? He came from England? What?
Yes, well, he started from Hampshire to go to America, but before, as far as we know, they was a Saxon family. They worked their way through Europe to Paris, and then they come over to England and they settled in Hampshire.
And Hampshire's in the southern part of
Southern
England?
part, is near as we can say, is Southampton, and you say that is in Hampshire. And he went from there to America, and that's when he started, we think, and may have been a pirate, and from Barbados. We can't prove it.
Now, I read in Paula's book that he was in Massachusetts and they had these navigation acts, which I guess taxed them. Was that what?
So the merchants felt there was no profit on any trading that was made.
So then he went down to Barbados and met two other men.
Correct, and they made this arrangement that he should buy land with certain specifications, and as I said, some of it was a harbor and land jutting out and easy access, and this was an ideal place for that.
Now, I read that at some later date, there was a dispute as to what the boundaries were really for this piece of land. So it's one of the boundaries was what we'd call the Mamaroneck River.
Right.
Which is...
in those days actually was also the boundary between New York and Connecticut.
Oh, was it?
They later changed it to the Byram River, but in those days it was still that.
Huh. And then they also talk about two gravelly brooks, one of which would be now Stevenston Brook.
And the other Pine Brook. In those days, map making was, a stump of a tree or to the rock 3 miles away, and they didn't have the distinctions we did. So one was indeed a gravelly brook, and you had to interpret what that meant.
Yes.
Now, did Mr. John Richbell have a wife?
Yes,
You know?
he married Anne, and she had already had 3 daughters. She was married before, obviously, and but they didn't produce any children themselves. So there was no males to carry on the title, and that's where it
Now,
ceases.
when you came to Mamaroneck, did you take a walk, and what did you see? I mean, where have you walked and had any association with John
Well,
Richbell?
our first walk was to try and trace the graveyard and the memorial of John Richbell. And on our way, we happened to, it was coincidence, Donald March happened to be walking down the road virtually at the same time as we looked at a plaque on the side of the road. And he said, no, that's nothing to do with John Richbell. I will show you where it is. So we walked. And
Did he just figure when he heard your voices that you must be
well, yeah,
Eddie
we wasn't
and Joe?
Americans. We wasn't Americans.
Because you had communicated with him, is that right?
Yeah, we had communicated a few months beforehand of we was coming to America, and he was, going to be pleased to see us and all the rest of it, which he was. Anyway, we walked along this road, and we come to some bushes, which was grossly overgrown, and we fought our way through them and found this stone. And that, when we could read it, it was of John Richbell.
Okay, so that was on where? What's
That was on
the
Rushmore
yes,
Avenue?
and the west basin of Mamaroneck. And actually, that's not the original stone. The original stone has been lost over the centuries, and that was a granite stone that was put up in
that's it,
61, right.
Yeah.
So in 1961 that was put there.
That's when then Tom Richbell unveiled it as we...
And Tom Richbell was an uncle of yours who lived in the United States?
Yeah, he was my dad's brother.
So he was invited by the town in 1961 to come and unveil a stone on
it,
Rushmore
yes.
Avenue in that little cemetery.
That's it,
So you got to the cemetery and it was all overgrown.
yes.
So then you came to see us in the town hall.
First thing next morning, we found out where the town hall was, and we went in, and we spoke to a young lady who went and there was a lot of commotion going on behind the scenes, and all of a sudden our friend come out with a friend, and
Well, Steve Altieri, who our town administrator, brought to my attention the fact that the cemetery wasn't looking so good, and we do know that in New York State, towns are responsible for the upkeep of cemeteries outside of cities. Even though if the cemeteries are inactive and they're not having burials actively, even though the cemeteries are located within villages. So if you have old cemeteries like the cemetery on Palmer Avenue near Mamaroneck Avenue, or you have the Gedney Cemetery, or you have the cemetery behind St. John and Paul Rectory, which was the Palmer Cemetery. There's one on the Post Road, by Sherwood's, the little one. So there are several of them. There's another one on Palmer Avenue by Delancey someplace. So what we do is we have a contractor that goes out with a crew of people to keep these cemeteries up. And I was disenchanted in the beginning of the year, this summer, because I saw the one across from that Just Meze place on Palmer Avenue. It was all overgrown. They came and cut it, but it has rained so much this year that the number of times we have the contractor come didn't keep up with the grass. So what happened next? The town sent some highway department personnel down there to clean up the cemetery.
The next morning, Joe come along, the foreman. And
Joe Tunnell.
Tunnell, yeah. And with his crew, and we said, look, what's got to be done? And he's got to clear it up, so he's done that within 4 hours, and that was all done. And we met you again this afternoon and we told you that the job was done. Well, now we're going to have a meeting to see what can be done about possibly fencing off that, because it is a graveyard and a family graveyard.
Now, Paula, you took a tour with Eddie and Joan around the town. Did you go look at the cemetery? Is there a sign?
No, they had
there?
already been there. Yeah.
Where
But
did you
they
go?
had mentioned about the plaque.
That's it, yeah, the plaque had been vandalised at one time.
Yeah.
And yes, move fast, that's going to be done.
Right. We went yesterday with Gloria Pritz, the
Oh,
village
good.
historian.
Gloria is the village of
Right.
Mamaroneck historian.
Right,
Yeah.
and we took them around to see several of the sites. We went to the Rocking Stone. They had seen
Oh,
the
good,
picture on the
good.
book,
That's
and we
Yeah.
went that, and different areas around town. We took them to the manor and Premium Point,
Good.
and they got a feel for the differences between our country and this country, and we took them into the actual villages and
Good.
the shops. And
We went today to the Larchmont Yacht Club to take a
That's
look
it.
across the harbor at the Orienta Point.
Yes.
Then we went to the Larchmont Shore Club. You could look across the open sound. And we drove to Fountain Square, and we went to St. John's Episcopal Church, but it wasn't open or we couldn't get in.
No.
So I thought there was a connection with England there, but we couldn't get in. But Paula, do you see anything in the history of the town that would reflect the ethos or the culture of the original English settlers? I mean, when did it all of a sudden become more heterogeneous? How long was the English settlers here before other people started to come?
Well, actually, by the time John Richbell died, which was in 1684, he had divvied up his property and had lots which were on the Post Road, which was the Westchester Path in those days, around Fenimore, down towards Richbell Road now. And he did have some settlers. There were about 77 settlers.
That's quite a few.
It really was not until the mid-1800s that immigrants came in. German immigrants came in when we had the rubber factory. Later in the 1800s, a lot of Italian immigrants came in who worked on the roads. They were master masons and very skilled, and the town was starting to build up, and they needed a lot of work done. So really, we didn't have as heterogeneous a group until later in the 1800s.
Much later. I noticed that I read a part of a book called Westchester. I'm trying to remember the man who wrote it, Simitoff or something. It's probably 20 years ago. And it seems to me that most of Westchester County at the turn of the century, the turn of the last century, 1900, was devoted to dairy farming. So that we have a lot of trees all over Westchester now, but it was actually cleared land for the cows. And I think that the part, what we call the unincorporated part of the town of Mamaroneck, was pretty much cows.
It was also a lot of forests,
Forests,
as you mentioned, and there were some lumber camps as well at the turn of the century.
Now, when John Richbell came here, he wanted to find a place that was on some kind of navigable water so he could get in and out. He wanted to be on
water.
a place with clear, fresh water running like a river, and he also wanted to be on a promontory or a hill or something. Which, is that the only reason that we are led to believe that he might have been a smuggler, or do we have any other evidence?
Well, we haven't got any evidence.
So that's all
we're
just
not
kind
gonna
of
say anymore.
guessing.
Sometimes legends come and
legends.
they get...
Yeah.
Now, apparently, Mr. Richbell, John Richbell, had an irascible nature. There's some story that he used to get angry, hot-headed sometimes.
Well,
Do we have any evidence of that?
We have we have two incidences where he had to collect some of his men to remove somebody from his property, and he done it rather violently. Burnt the roof off their house so that they had to get out. He'd given warning at previous times, but they didn't seem to take any notice, so best of Valerie used a bit of force, and they went.
Now, let me ask you a question. You knew something vaguely about John Richbell, but
Very vague.
when you went, and Paula, maybe you know more about this too, when you went out to the Mormon genealogical place, did they show you microfilm? What do you say to them? How does that place work out there?
Well, when
How did
you
find out?
go there, you go into that. They've got it divided up into countries, and
Countries of origin that came here?
Yeah, and you find that the English one, Britain, which we found was on the second floor, and you go up there and you go to that section. Well, then you have to just wait for somebody to come to you, and you explain why you're here, and they get somebody, the historian of that time, comes to you and takes you to find these books, or it's on books, films, and all sorts of information is stored.
So you told them that you wanted to find out something about somebody in the 17th century named John Richbell.
At a place called Mamaroneck.
Okay.
And they put it up on screen. Well, the little fella, we went to lunch then. When we came back, there was a nice young lady waiting for us to take us round, and she was very, very helpful. And she found that there was a book there with the name of John Constable, who was John Richbell, who was a constable, and it was for birth, deaths and marriages. So, but there's no recording over this side of it being so.
Over in this part of the
country. So we don't know how it got to the Mormons, because I mean you should have had it first. So anyway, that's how it started, of finding out about John Richbell.
Now, Paula, when you wrote the book, did you examine documents that we have in the town? Do we have any primary sources that were of any help to you with respect to where the land was, or who owned it, or anything like that?
Unfortunately, the primary sources are up in Albany.
Okay.
You know, in the town records there are copies, but none of the original. What we do have is original town minutes from the town, which started, as we said, in 1697. In the home of Anne Richbell.
Oh, Anne Richbell, who was the wife of John. Was John still alive?
She was the widow.
Widow, right.
So.
Do we know
But
where
we had
she
women
lived?
in government even then, so to
Do
speak.
we know where that house was? Does it say? Do we have any idea where she was?
Well, I don't know. Nobody. There's two people that we've spoken to says it one place, and they said it's another. But we've been there, and they said, you know, that was where the house was, because there's obviously nothing there now. But when Uncle Tom was doing this at the opening, he did find some words that said that the house was on a hill, and it was going to be removed and brought down to the village, but there wasn't a carpenter capable enough of doing the type of work that was done in those days. So, as far as we know, somebody was
We have the James Fenimore Cooper House on the Post Road, which is near the West Basin. Of course, that's a famous American author who was in the 19th century. But now, where do you live in England? What's the name of your town that you come from?
Well, it's a village called Chigwell.
And there were some famous people from that town or village.
William Penn, who Pennsylvania he discovered, and Burns, the writer, and quite a few.
You mean the Scottish poet Burns? Was he there? B-U-R-N-S Burns?
No,
Somebody
he
else.
come from Essex.
Okay.
Didn't he? I think.
And then did you say Dickens was there?
Dickens, yeah.
So there are a lot of pretty famous people there. And you lived there all your life?
No. I've lived there 40-odd years.
Okay. Now, did you come from any place that was associated with John Richbell?
No, none at all. No, and I was brought up in a place called Cricklewood, which is northwest London. And then I got a job at a Grange Farm, which is in Chigwell. And I stayed there 29.5 years.
What did you find most interesting or most difficult to research when you were doing this part of the history, Paula? I mean,
actually, a lot of it really has been quite documented and has been well recorded. There really, unfortunately, aren't any new information that's come up.
But it is interesting now. The Mormons do have a lot of research material out there.
Oh yes.
I always was kind of interested to go there, but I didn't know whether you just go in as a layperson and not a professional historian and just get information.
No, you can get it. They've got a wonderful place there for the choir to practice. And
Well, they have the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
And you can just walk in there, and they was practicing when we was there one night, and it was really marvellous.
So is Mamaroneck what you expected? Did you think it was more city-ish, or what was in your minds?
We didn't know what it was.
Get?
I mean, when we arrived at the station...
Did you get here by train?
Yeah, we come from the airport to here by train, and then we got a taxi from to the motel, which was very relieving. It's a long journey.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
So you went from England to New York?
Did
you go to Canada?
JF Kennedy. Year before last we went to Canada. And then we've done the west of America, and now we've come to the east.
Now, what's Mamaroneck mean? I mean, maybe that's disputable, but what does it mean?
There are several interpretations. Back when it was surveyed in the colonial times, a surveyor was describing where the fresh water fell into the salt water, because by the harbor there was a bed of rocks, and the water cascaded down as a waterfall into the harbor. So that was one of the translations, or the most commonly known translation. There are a few other ideas. One Indian interpretation is the place of the Rolling Stones, and the one that I kind of based my book on was something called the Gathering Place, because it was felt like Columbus Park is where the rivers come together, and it's felt that was a perfect site for Indians to come together for their powwows, and they would all come by canoes up the rivers and meet in the Columbus Park area, and that was the gathering place, and that was another interpretation of the name.
And these Siwanoy Indians were they Iroquois Indians?
Mohican.
Oh, Mohican, which were much more pacific and irenic and calm than the Iroquois. The Mohawks of the Iroquois nation were cannibals. I mean, they used to come running down here from, I guess, upstate New York. And from what I've read, the Siwanoys were very easygoing compared to them, because they had an easy time getting shellfish. They didn't have to hunt as much. They had oysters and all kinds of things. And when the Iroquois would come down in these raiding parties, they would get into long boats and go across to Long Island to escape the Iroquois, who were much more warlike, I think. So, I mean, I've read in Indian books. I'm not an expert on it, but they say that the Mohican Indians, the Siwanoys, had a pretty easy life compared to the ones that were up in the freezing reaches of northern New York State, because we had estuaries and all kinds of sea life.
Right.
Here.
Right. And the Hommocks area was perfect marshland, the salt marshes. I think the Sidewinder, our interpretation of the name is of the salt marshes.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
So this is, this is great, because if you didn't come, Eddie, we wouldn't have been having this conversation. One thing that I read, Paula, talk about immigrants coming here, that at the time of the Civil War, there were Irish immigrants.
That was also around the potato famine.
And the
You could
potato
tell when
famine,
they-
and then people would, a lot of the Irish were in the Civil War on the Union side. You could buy your way out of going to war, so that richer people didn't go and the
Right.
poorer people did go. But when Abraham Lincoln ran for president 2 times, Westchester County voted against Abraham Lincoln because they didn't want to go, the poorer people who were going off to war, this is what I read in the Journal News, were indisposed. I mean, they weren't disposed to be so easy to answer the call of going and fighting when the wealthier people could get by their way out of it. So I don't know, that was something I never even thought of, because we've always been brought up as very pro-Lincoln and very pro-Union. We're New Yorkers, and so forth and so on. So that was a tidbit of history that I read. I don't know if most Westchester people would know about that. A lot of the states used to have required history of your state. You'd have required American history, and then if you lived in New Jersey, you studied civics and history of New Jersey, New York, so forth. I don't know, but I don't think any of my children, either of my children,
it's part of the school curriculum here in the 4th grade. That's
Okay.
when they learn local history.
But it's not. People are not as maybe aware as they might be in other places. In New England, where the history seems to be more codified, or it's easier to get a hold of it, the people who live in Concord, Massachusetts, will tell you about the bridge, or the people who live, in Boston, the Tea Party. But right around here, we don't seem to have a really defined sense, as much as New Rochelle, which had the Huguenots, who were the French Protestants who came over here during the conflicts in France. But we're very glad you came over.
Mr. Richbell mentioned that he hears that there is a Richbell coat of arms that they are trying to seek out.
Okay, now where would you find that? From the Mormons or some heraldry place?
We've got to do that in England. We've got to do that in England.
That should be interesting.
Yeah, we are. We're trying to find the actual address to write to. We've tried 2 people.
Probably go on the internet.
Well,
on
that's
the
what
computer.
that's what we've got to do. We've tried 2 places where they used to do them, but they've stopped. So whether it's a trade
Well,
that's
if you
dying.
find them, please let us know.
Oh yeah, well I'll send you one of the.
We'll have Paula talk about it on TV.
If we can get it, we will.
Yeah. Paula's training. Paula's a medical doctor, and she's very well educated and very broadly interested in things. So we were very, very lucky to have her at a little hiatus when we got her to write this book.
Yeah.
Because she did a magnificent job. Our friend Councilwoman Phyllis Whitner found Paula and hooked her into service on behalf of the public interest.
Good.
So we're very, very delighted that she's
Perhaps
joined
we can
us.
go into the next chapter when we get the.
Now, if you get the coat of arms, you can have an addendum in the back, right?
Yeah.
Second printing.
So Paula, thank you very, very
thank you.
much. And Eddie, thank you very,
Thank
very
you
much.
for having me.
And we're delighted that you came. And we'll have to take a picture of the renovated cemetery and send that over to you, and it will spur us on to look at all the other graveyards in the town. And I think that the Historical Society in Mamaroneck, certainly, don't you think, Paula, would be able to put a little plaque or something?
Well, we're going to keep in contact with Don anyway.
And Steve Altieri will be very interested to see how things go. And I want to thank Joe Tuno and the men in the Highway Department for being so quick to...
Oh yes, they were there sharp.
Yeah, so that's good. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Come back and see us soon, and thank you very much, Paul.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Bye.